Have you ever felt like something was missing? A bigger house, a fatter wallet, a brighter life? And thought to yourself, if I just had that, I'd finally feel at peace. Here's a truth most people learn far too late. Eyes that can't see what they already have will never feel full, no matter how much more comes their way. Because the problem was never the size of what you owned, it was always the way you were looking at it. Today's story is about the richest man in the city and an old beggar whose name nobody even knew. One had everything and never felt it was enough. The other had nothing and slept full every single night. And when their paths crossed, the rich man learned something that first made him laugh, then made him angry, and in the end brought him to his knees at his own son's door. Stay with this story until the end, because maybe, like this merchant, you can't quite see the value of what you already have, and maybe someone is standing at your door right now, waiting, and you haven't noticed. When Kamir was 8 years old, he watched his father lose everything in a single night. A storm hit the city, and all 3 of his father's ships went down in the harbor. Kamir never forgot the way his father's hands shook the next morning, or watching him take his mother's last ring to the market, haggling for a long time, then coming home with an empty pot. That winter, some nights there was no bread in their house at all. Kamir would watch the neighborhood children eating in the street from a distance, saying nothing, his stomach growling. From that day on, he made himself a quiet promise. He would never again let anything be missing. He would never again look into an empty pot. Years passed. Kamir grew up, worked the docks, saved what little he earned from small trades, worked day and night, and eventually built his own caravans. In time, he came to live in the largest house in the city. Silk, cinnamon, gold, ivory, there was no wealth that didn't pass through his hands. He had 20 servants, 3 estates, more chests than he could count. But even living in the grandest house in the city, the 8-year-old boy still lived inside him, still afraid of that empty pot. That's why every evening he locked his door, lit a candle, and opened his chests one by one to count them. He'd weigh the gold in his palm, let it slip slowly through his fingers, then lock everything back up. It wasn't greed, at least in his own eyes. It was a survival habit. But to everyone around him, the result was the same. Kamir never felt like he had enough. His wife had asked him once, "Why do you still count it? No one in this city is richer than you." Kamir hadn't answered. He'd just closed the lid of the chest. One evening, his son, Naeem, 9 years old, walked into his study carrying a small wooden boat. He'd made it with his own hands, worked on it for days. "Father," he said, his eyes bright, "look, I made this myself. I'm going to sail it at the harbor tomorrow. Will you come watch?" Kamir was counting gold at candlelight at that moment, a handful of coins in his palm. Without even looking up, he said, "Not now, Naeem. Can't you see I'm busy?" Naeem stood in the doorway a moment longer, holding the boat against his chest, maybe hoping his father would turn around one last time. Kamir didn't turn around. Naeem left without a word, his steps slow, his shoulders low. Kamir didn't even notice that night, his eyes still on the coins. But it was the last time Naeem ever asked. He never walked into his father's study again for anything. One afternoon, with the sun directly overhead, Kamir was walking through the market when he passed a stone fountain.
An old beggar sat at its base. No one remembered how many years he'd been there. He wore a patched, sun-bleached robe and carried a bowl with a chipped rim. Nobody knew his name, but that day something caught Kamir's attention, an expression on the beggar's face he'd never seen before. Not pain, not longing, not despair, just a plain, quiet smile, the look of a man who was full.
Kamir stopped. His servants waited a few steps behind him. "You have nothing," Kamir said, his voice carrying both mockery and real curiosity. "How can you look this calm, this at peace?" The beggar looked up, squinting against the sun, then turned to face him. "Perhaps," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I'm richer than your chests." Kamir burst out laughing, so loudly that passers-by turned to look. He didn't give the sentence a second thought. He went home, counted his chests. That night, he slept just as restlessly as always. But a week later, passing the same way, he saw the beggar again. The same calm, the same smile, as if nothing had changed. This time, Kamir couldn't just walk on. He slowed his steps. "Prove it," he said, no longer mocking, genuinely unsettled now. "I'm the richest man in this city. Who are you to lecture me about wealth?" The beggar was quiet for a while, his eyes fixed somewhere far away. Then, for the first time, he began to talk about himself. "Once," he said, "I had chests of my own too, sir. I was a merchant like you, maybe even wealthier than you. I had 3 sons, a beautiful home, standing in this city. Then sickness came, swept through the whole city. Within a month, I lost everything, my wife, 2 of my sons, my home, and then even what little money I had left slipped away because I no longer had the strength to work. For years I spoke to no one. I lived only with anger, only with loss. When there was nothing left in my hands, I sat down by this fountain, and honestly, I was waiting to die. But I didn't die. One morning, as the sun came up, I understood something. I still had one thing left, my breath. Every morning since, I start with just that. I was a man like you once, sir. The difference is, you're still afraid of what you might lose. I already lost everything, and I learned that even what's left over is a treasure." This time, Kamir didn't laugh. He wanted to say something, but nothing came out. He turned and walked home in silence. That evening, he locked his door as usual, lit his candle, opened his chest. He picked up the gold, weighed it in his palm, but right then an image came to him, sudden and sharp, sharper than it had ever been before. Naeem standing in the doorway, the little wooden boat held against his chest, waiting. Not now, Naeem. How many times had he said that sentence? How many times had he looked past that small face, those bright eyes, without even seeing them? He closed the chest, blew out the candle, and sat in the dark for a long time. Days passed. Kamir went back to his business, managed his caravans, greeted ships at the harbor. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, a small question had lodged itself, quietly, like a pebble caught in his shoe. A week later, alone, without telling anyone, he went to the fountain by himself. "Teach me," Kamir said. There was no mockery left in his voice, no anger. The beggar looked at him for a long moment, then held out his chipped bowl. "Go home tonight," he said.
Put this bowl on your table, and everything that passed through your hands today, not what you earned, but what you already have, pour it into this bowl, one piece at a time. Say it out loud. A healthy body, a family who loves you. And sir, count your son's name too, if you still remember to look at him. Kamir's face went pale. He didn't even ask how the beggar knew. That evening he went home, locked his door, but instead of sitting down with his chest, he sat at his table. He set the bowl in front of him, lit the candle, and began to count. Not gold this time, but words. "I have a healthy body," he said, and his own voice sounded strange to him in the empty room. Then the second came. "I can hear my wife's voice every morning." Then he stopped, said nothing for a long while. Then he stood up, took the candle in his hand, and walked to Naeem's room.
His son was asleep. Beside him still sat the little wooden boat, one mast broken, untouched for months. Kamir sat down on the edge of the bed and listened to his son's quiet breathing for a long time. He said nothing. He just stayed there, in the candlelight, holding the boat in his hands. The next morning, for the first time in years, he stopped by Naeem's room before leaving for work. His son woke, looked up at him with startled eyes. "Should we sail your boat at the harbor today?" Kamir said. Naeem's eyes lit up in a way his father would never forget. It wasn't a transformation that happened overnight. Kamir was still a merchant, still ran his caravans, but every evening he kept sitting at the table with the bowl instead of the chest, and every so often he'd sail a small boat with his son at the harbor too. Years passed. One winter morning, the beggar died quietly by the fountain, in his sleep, without pain, or so it was told afterwards. No one in the city knew his past, how many sons he'd had, what he'd lost. But Kamir was there at the burial, the old chipped bowl still in his hand, and beside him, Naeem, now a grown man. Maybe the question isn't what's missing. Maybe the question is, what will you put in your bowl tonight? And whose name, whose quiet wait at your door have you forgotten? Because owning 50 chests of gold doesn't fill you up. Being able to truly see the one bowl you already have, and maybe a small boat waiting quietly at your door, that's what fills you. Tonight, try it yourself. What do you have today? Not what you've earned, but what's already yours. And more than that, who did you fail to notice waiting at your door today? Tell me something in the comments. What's one thing you already have but never think to count? If this story touched something in you, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. I'll be back with a new story soon. Until then, fill your bowl, not your chest.